day. I mean, we have a balance sheet in America today that is roughly debt to GDP of 400%. We have a consumer that, in a lot of cases, is bankrupt. They're zombies. We have a banking system that, let's face it, the money center banks are insolvent. So, and we have an economy today that's very, very dependent on new credit, and credit is contracting at the fastest pace in over 45 years. So major differences, I think, just at looking at where we are and where we're trying to go between those two periods of time.
So what about on the macro side? What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, the idea that here we are 1 year after Lehman Brothers, the federal government has basically made it known that there will not be a large money center bank that will fail. The Lehman Brothers outcome was not something they were anticipating. And so, therefore, they've created a variety of backstops and commitments to the United States economy, roughly $17 trillion. You could see all of this at stimulus.org. Of the $17 trillion, we've spent about $3.15 trillion. And what do we have to show for it? I mean, we've had 3 of the last 4 quarters through the September most recent quarter that have been negative. We're going to post a positive quarter, maybe 75, 80 billion in quote-unquote GDP for the quarter. But 75 to 80 billion after 3 prior negative quarters, and we've added $3.15 trillion to the spending situation. Probably not a very good rate of return.
What about when you look at some of the other things happening right now, the move towards health care from the government, the cap and trade? I mean, those things to you feel like those are going to move us towards a depression?
Yeah, I think, look, we're just like in the 30s. We had a situation where the economy was breaking down, and the government enacts Smoot-Hawley, which essentially put, I think, the kibosh on the economy and guaranteed the depression. Here we are, we're debating a health care bill, which some experts are saying this is going to be a minimum $300 billion, some saying as much as $500 or $600 billion annually to the budget. We're already running deficits in the $1.5 to $2 trillion mark. I mean, that essentially, I think, sinks the United States economy. I mean, we just don't have the ability to go back to our creditors and say, we need more money. And if you look at our creditors, if you look at the Japanese, Chinese, and the Middle East, every one of them of late has been on the wire talking about changes going forward with regards to their lending with the United States. So I would say that either cap and trade, which is an even bigger boondoggle, or some kind of a health care bill that requires that type of spending annually, there's no wiggle room. We don't have the ability to do that.
People are talking about the fact that they feel the bulls are on TV, the propaganda machine's in full force, as you know. So the talk is of the banking system, things are getting better, they're getting more healthy. Is there really deleveraging in the banking system a year later after Lehman? Where are we with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the only type of deleveraging we've witnessed has been some deleveraging within the consumer space. Consumer credit clearly in decline in a large way over the last 4, 5, 6 months. You're getting we had the foreclosure data for Q3 yesterday. That's up 23% year over year. That is basically a forced deleveraging taking place. Of course, small business bankruptcies, individual bankruptcies, they're up year over year. But then you look at the banking sector, especially the money center banks. And the money center banks are clicking along. The government has rolled back mark-to-market accounting. The FDIC is looking for more money. In fact, they're going after the small and mid-sized banks to prepay and essentially reliquefy the FDIC. But if you look at Goldman or Bank of America or J.P. Morgan, look at the value at risk statistics, VAR it's called in the industry, and actually value at risk has doubled in the most recent quarter. So if anything, the money centers are pushing the envelope even further. And why, you ask? Because the government made it very clear after Lehman's failure that they were not going to let another large money center bank fail. And so when you've got that kind of backstop, the moral hazard goes to a whole new level. And that's why I think you're seeing a lot of these large entities just pushing the envelope even further. Now, of course, they're not doing lending. So what they're doing is they're speculating in financial markets.
What about this idea of loans being suspended in animation and being carried on the books as performing loans? What are your thoughts as you see that in reference to the banking system?
You talk about, the deleveraging process, which Mother Nature wants that to happen at this stage of the economic cycle. What's happened is we've had a variety of either state or federal government-imposed moratoriums. We've had the large money center banks, which are insolvent and have had a difficult time, other than getting assistance from the government in raising private sector capital. They've essentially, it's almost like a Mexican standoff. You have the borrower who can't make a payment, the lender who's insolvent, and then you have the government trying to play the mediator, if you will, trying to get someone to move. And a lot of these loans, I mean, you're already seeing it in some of the residential mortgage foreclosure data. People have stopped making payments. They can't even locate the deed of trust. Therefore, they can't foreclose on a home. More people see this. Then more people decide not to make their payments. The bank then goes back to the borrower, tries to get them to make some kind of payment. So you have, it's hard to quantify, but my guess is by looking at some of the foreclosure data, looking at some of the performance of the mortgage-backed marketplace, both commercial and residential, that many payments are not being made. And so you have this almost suspended in animation environment. And look, it could involve, my guess is it involves probably several $1 trillion in mortgages. And so that, I think, is just a prelude of more problems to come within the mortgage space.
Let me ask you kind of a strange question here. It's a little different than what you would normally be hit with, Bill, but you guys over there at Bearing Asset have nailed these markets the last couple of years, as we mentioned earlier. And this is my question for you. The less expensive side of the real estate side over in Vegas now, they're back in gambling a little bit over there and trying to buy some of those. There's a lot of bidding one on top of another, as we were talking about earlier in the interview. Same thing in South Florida. This is beginning to develop. My question for you, and in your opinion, do you want to be a landlord? Because it's paid off the last 80, 100 years, but going forward in the United States with the deindustrialization of this country, with the purposeful lowering of the standards of living, do you want to be a landlord in the United States going forward, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I would say that part of the analysis, you look at the number of homes built in relationship to our economy, our population, wages, which are actually declining significantly. You know, you look at things like the state of the municipalities. I mean, the state's probably going to run a $175, $200 billion deficit next year. So how are they going to make up that shortfall? Increasing property taxes is probably one thing that comes to mind. I would say that in some cases it may make sense to buy property, assuming there's some type of job stability in that particular part of the country. I think that's a rare situation today. I think that the FHA has essentially become the new subprime, so that's why you're seeing a lot of activity in the housing market. Maybe 42% of the transactions involve some kind of foreclosure or distress situation. So, yeah, there are people out there essentially trying to catch bottoms, but I would say it's analogous to the NASDAQ fall after the tech bubble burst. You know, you had a lot of people trying to buy NASDAQ 3000. Well, you know where the NASDAQ is today. They're still underwater. So looking at this from 10,000 feet up, I think we have another leg down in housing. Part of that is a function of the deterioration in the labor market. Part of that is a function of, you know, all of the housing that's been built, again, by mispricing credit and subsidizing a part of the economy like no other part of the economy. Let's face it, the housing industry receives more subsidies than any other part of the economy, other than maybe the pharmaceutical industry.
David Tice always likes to mention the great work that you and Kevin do over at Bearing with regards to sentiment. Very quickly, where are we with regards to sentiment?
Yeah, we are, the sentiment shift over the last 6.5 months has been fascinating. We've gone from end-of-the-world fear to basically the central planners have put Humpty Dumpty back together again. You need to get into stocks. You need to buy the dips. We're in a new bull market. Basically, every money manager that I see on CNBC that walked people into the fire starting several years ago are basically touting the bull story again.